ندرسها هي التي كان عليها الصحابة والتابعون وتابع التابعين بما في ذلكم الأئمة الأربعة.
And Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he was present in a very unique time, in a very unique juncture in Islamic history. And for us to truly appreciate the benefit that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah has brought to this ummah, and in terms of all of the books that he wrote and the groups of innovation which he refuted, we have to appreciate and understand the time, the specific time that Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah was actually born and lived in. And this was a time in the 8th century when we see that those groups and sects which emerged in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th centuries of Islam. There were many sects, as you know. In the 1st century of Islam, there were the Khawarij, the Rafida, the Murji'a, the Qadariya. They were the 4 foundational sects which occurred in the 1st century of Islam. Then in the 2nd century of Islam came the poison of Ilmul Kalam, which is speaking about Allah, His names, His attributes, using the tools and language of Greek philosophy. This came into the Ummah in the 2nd century after Islam. And then there were groups which appeared who adopted this as their way. The Mu'tazila, the Jahmiya, the Kullabiyya, the Karramiyya, the Ash'ariyya, the Maturidiyya. They took this way and they developed schools of thought. And then, because of political factors and social factors and political factors, these schools of thought, they began to spread and acquire dominance and strength. And then we had other elements that came in from the Batiniyya, those who desired to demolish Islam from within. And they came and they brought philosophy to merge it with Islam. In the 4th century, in the 5th century, and they came and they established in Egypt, and they established a state in Egypt. And so all of these things were taking place in the centuries before Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah that he came, before he came. And what happened is that these people, after the Imams of the Sunnah had strength, because in the 2nd and 3rd and the 4th centuries of Islam, we know that the people of Sunnah had strength in the various lands. But from the 5th and the 6th century, this situation turned. And we saw that the people of Bid'ah, from the Ahlul Kalam, and from the people of Kalam mainly, that they gained strength in all the various Muslim lands. So there are reasons that explain, there are historical reasons which explain why actually this was the case. And so Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he came at a time when the way of the Salaf wasn't really known to many people, even to the ulama, to the scholars in that time. There were many scholars who were born and they acquired knowledge of the hadith and the athar. But they acquired knowledge of these affairs at a time when those who were in the prominent positions were Ash'aris, people of Kalam, people of Tasawwuf, and so on and so forth. And so they acquired knowledge in this type of setting. And they didn't truly understand, and they didn't truly have a connection with what the Salaf were actually upon. And people like Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, Imam al-Qurtubi rahimahullah, even Ibn Hajar, who came after Ibn Taymiyyah, he was of this category of people. They came in this time. And so the way of the Salaf wasn't something that was really known. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he came, and as you may or may not know, that Ibn Taymiyyah was someone who had amassed an amazing library of books. He inherited books. He was someone who would, if he didn't have a book, he would borrow it and write the whole book by hand. And as a result of this, and books would come to him, as a result of this, he amassed thousands and thousands of books, to such a degree that the scholars today explain that there is hardly a book that Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim, that, from the Salaf, except that he would have knowledge of it. And so one of the signs that they used, or that to establish that a book was in existence, is if Ibn Taymiyyah mentioned it in any of his books. Right? So this is how they find lost books from the time of the Salaf. So Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he inherited the knowledge of the books that were written by the Salaf, of the books of Imam al-Darimi, and the books of all the refutations that were written. He acquired them, they came to him, and from that he acquired knowledge of what happened to the ummah, of all of these innovations, where they came from. And he managed to know and understand the actual opinions of every single group and sect. Because not only did he read the books of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah, of the Salaf, he looked into the books. The books came to, so he read the books of the Asha'ira. He read the books of the Maturidiyya. He read the books of all of the innovators and their figureheads, those who were writing and promoting their false beliefs. And from that he acquired an amazing encyclopedic knowledge about every single group, every single faction, to such a degree that Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, he says in one of his books, that there is no innovator who innovated a bid'ah except that I know his name. I know who it was who originated that specific bid'ah and what land he was in. This is a statement mentioned from Ibn Taymiyyah in one of his works. And so when Ibn Taymiyyah came in that period in the 7th and 8th centuries, then what he did is that he wrote and he defended and he revived, he basically connected the latter part of this ummah from the 8th century onwards. He re-established the connection back to the way of the Salaf. So it's as if he tied the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th and whatever came afterwards, he tied it back to the 3rd century after Islam or the 4th century after Islam. He made that connection back. Why? Because through him we came to know of many of the books that were written by the Imams of the Salaf. We came to know of many of those books that we didn't otherwise have knowledge of. So therefore we see this connection was re-established between the first 3 generations and with what came after the 8th century by way of what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah did, by way of his jihad in writing, defending, clarifying, explaining, refuting, and as a result of which he suffered a great deal of harms. He was imprisoned, he was oppressed, he was attacked, he was maligned. Why? Because he refuted every single faction. He refuted the philosophers. He demolished and destroyed them. He refuted Aristotle, Plato, and all of those from this ummah, or who ascribed to this ummah, who were using their philosophies from the Mutafalsifa, Ibn Sina, and Al-Farabi, and other than them. He destroyed all of them. He destroyed them in such a way that in fact he annihilated the very foundations of all of Western civilization today, which are basically the philosophy of the Greeks. So he demolished them. He demolished the Batiniyya, the group I mentioned in the 4th, 5th century, who came in order to demolish Islam. He destroyed the Ahlul Kalam in all of their different factions. The Ash'aris, the Mu'tazila, the Jahmiyyah, the Karramiyya. He didn't leave any single one of them. The Salimiyya, no matter how obscure they were, he demolished all of them. He demolished the arguments of the Qadariyya, the Jabariyya, the Jahmiyyah, the Khawarij. Not a single. He demolished the belief of the Christians. He annihilated them. Al-Jawab al-Sahih liman baddala al-Din al-Masih. Right? Not a single fraction except that he refuted them all, whether they are from Islam or whether they are not from Islam. And by way of that, by way of all of his books, he re-established, he made that connection again to the Tawheed of the messengers and the Aqidah that the Sahaba were upon. And so therefore when we are reading or when we are studying these texts from Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, or when we are reading his books like Wasitiyya and Al-Hamawiyya and At-Tadmuriyya, and when we are reading his works like Minhaj al-Sunnah, which is a refutation of the Rafida, or we are reading Al-Tis'iniyya, or many Dar Ta'arud, many of these other famous books that we have, what we are seeing is we are seeing a clarification and a purification of the Aqidah of Islam in that critical juncture in the 8th century, when all of the groups of Bid'ah had, they had domination, they had strength, they had clout, they had the leaders on their side. And so this is what we see Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah doing at that critical juncture in time. So as the Shaykh says here, that Ibn Taymiyyah, he died in the year of 728 Hijrah, and his jihad is ma'ruf. Ma'rufun bi jihadihi, bilisanihi. That he's known with his jihad by way of his tongue, and by way of his pen, and by way of his soul, his self, his soul. And likewise he participated in the jihad against the Tartars and the Mongols when they came across the Muslim lands. And he defended the Aqidah. He affirmed the Aqidah of the Salaf. And he demolished the doubts of those who brought those doubts. So his pen was it was like basically something that was quick and rapid against and something that, by which he wrote many books, and as a result of which the Aqidah and the Manhaj of Ahlul Sunnati wal Jama'ah became straightened and corrected in the affairs of Aqidah and Fiqh and Saluk and so on and so forth. And so this is Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah.